Just now, a little more than 24 hours away from the first Democratic presidential debate of this cycle. The two-night primetime events begin tomorrow night in Miami. It's going to be hot down there, I hear, in a lot of ways. The 10 candidates will make up their pitch to voters on one night include the first night will be former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Senators Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar and others, with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren taking center stage. I guess this is based on polling, very much in the middle. You can see she belongs to be there. Senator Warren will not be on the same stage with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He'll appear on the second night, but they are clearly going for the same voters in many ways. A new online straw poll out of the left-leaning group MoveOn.org shows Warren surging as the first choice of its members. This is non-scientific, but it's people who are online and wanted to express themselves. She's beating Sanders by 20 points. NBC News reports that while MoveOn backed Sanders over Hillary Clinton back in 2016, the fact that progressives are gravitating toward like-minded policy wonk, Warren could be another sign of trouble for Sanders, who has been overtaken by the Massachusetts senator in some recent polls nationally. Meanwhile, a new Morning Consult poll of Democratic voters nationally shows Joe Biden actually maintaining his frontrunner status with 38%, up from 3 points since March. That's not bad for a week. He's been through a week of buffeting. But take a look at Sanders and Warren. Since March, Sanders has dropped 8 points, while Warren has gained 6 points. From Warren, I'm joined by Neera Tanden, a real pro, CEO of the Center for American Progress, Annie Linskey, national political reporter from the Washington Post, but more importantly, recently from the Globe. So you guys know politics as much as I know. I'm shattered by this. I was telling you right before we went on the air. I'm shattered by the fact that Biden is winning 38% among all Democrats, but he's not even really in the running among people on the left, the progressive side of the party. Right. And there is going to be a disconnect. But let's, for this conversation, talk about what I think is the implicit battle, intramurals, if you will, between Bernie and Elizabeth. Bernie has the old soldier. He had all the loyalties. It's like he's the Adlai Stevenson of our time. He represents the good old days. He made a great run against Hillary Clinton, almost won, and he won a huge numbers of votes in 2016. He's coming back again. He's 78 now. And along comes a relative young person, Elizabeth Warren. I mean, it's getting up as an old party. She's only 70. And she's sort of the younger version of Bernie. And my question, is that going to be the fight we're going to see implicitly the next two nights? Neera.
I do think you'll see Senator Sanders try to differentiate both with Vice President Biden, and even though she's not on the stage with him, Senator Warren. I think the one thing is, for a lot of Democrats, actually, Senator Warren was a person they wanted to run in the past. She didn't run, and some of that support went to, obviously, a lot of that support went to Senator Sanders. I actually think this is more of the gravitational pull of this, particularly with the MoveOn group, who really strongly supported Senator Warren in her run in Massachusetts and has been a big backer of hers. And I think this is actually more the natural alignment of where they would have been.
I sense something going in her direction, which is primordial. There's something in the party that says the socialist label that Bernie has put on himself is too much to sell in the general election. So in a bit, it's not just taking Bernie's votes away from him on electability. It's grabbing some Biden votes who are afraid we're going to get Bernie. Yeah. So she benefits from both.
Well, her strategy so far has been quite different from Sanders. I mean, if you look at Senator Sanders and go to any of his rallies, it's a throwback to 2016.
Are they kids?
Well, they're the same people. They're the same people who are there. And more to the point, he is saying the same thing. What Elizabeth Warren has been able to do is reach out, and she's been able to get people who thought maybe, oh, she's the second choice. Maybe I really like Buttigieg, but Warren is my second choice. And as some of those people have sort of deflated, she's taken, some of those people who were saying she's my second choice have heard all of her policy plans. I go to her events, and people are really paying quite close attention to this policy every day. And
she has new stuff all the time, which shows energy. Biden hasn't been able to show that kind of energy, intellectual energy. They come up with new stuff every day because the party is dying for a future. I don't think they want to talk about the past. Right. They want to talk. By the way, it didn't really hurt Biden talking about his ability to deal with these old seggies, but it didn't help him either. But nobody wants to talk about that stuff.
I do think one thing that is happening right now in the primary, and it's, I think a lot of people were surprised by Vice President's numbers staying relatively strong after specifically last
Well, that's
week.
the large world beyond the cable world.
Yes, absolutely. But I think what's really happening is people underestimate how much Trump has changed factors in the Democratic Party. So I think right now a lot of people just look at all these statements or these mini scandals and compare them to Donald Trump, and they say, that looks pretty small in comparison to Donald
I hear the
Trump.
phrase, what about?
What about Trump?
I hear the phrase, and I hear it from every time I like to argue with people, as you know. And I argue with my friends who are always to my left. It seems all my life they're to my left. And I love to argue, including my family members, and inevitably their response is, if I have any shot at a Democrat for being imperfect, they go, what about Trump?
Well, sure, but I think with Biden and his last week, he was eating away at his political capital. I mean, he's got political capital with African-American voters. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He has a long relationship with them. But the people that we were talking to, the voters we talked to last week, were saying, hey, we don't want to keep hearing this. You can make some mistakes, okay? You can make some mistakes. You can't keep making them. And so that's what he did. He spent his capital last week. That's why you didn't really see it in the polls. But if he keeps doing this, if he can't get his act
Why does he
together,
walk out? Here's a psychobabble question. Why does Joe Biden, who I've known for years and I like him, how does he walk out on the edge all the time? Why does he get right at the edge of the cliff? Let's talk about race. Wait, well, how about not talking about race? Let's talk about the old segregationists that used to run our party, which is the dirty secret of the Democratic Party. It was the segregationist party in many ways up until the 60s.
That is very fair. But I think, to your point, there is a broad question, which is, why is he talking about the 70s or 80s when he really should be talking not just about 2019, but 2020, 21, 22. I think he does. Look, we have a debate coming up. I think he does have.
Is he going to do it tomorrow night? Will he do it Friday? Will he do it Thursday night? Will he talk about Grandpa Finnegan again, or his father? You know, the old Massachusetts. Will he do that again, or will he say, no, I'm going to say the word future 50 times?
That's why Warren seems so young. She's not doing that. She's coming up with new ideas that are fresh ideas. I mean, that's what's amazing is these are ideas that aren't even coming out of think tanks. They're coming out of her think tank.
Why is she getting the big push from the media right now? Front page of the New York Times Magazine the other day. She gets the big. Beto got it a month or two ago.
The media likes things that are new.
That went away, and then Buttigieg got it too.
She's doing better in the polls.
I'm going to ask you a reporter question. Why was it Buttigieg was the flavor of the month 2 or 3 weeks ago? Before the flavor of the month was Beto, and now it seems like the flavor. Does somebody decree this somewhere?
You're talking to somebody who's covered. I've covered Elizabeth Warren for I think 7 or 8 years.
About the national media.
I don't know.
Actually,
there is something about if you just look at the front pages of major magazines. One person gets Esquire. I'm sorry, they get Vanity Fair, and then somebody gets the New York Times.
I don't think that was very helpful. That Vanity Fair front page cover.
I think it really ticked off a lot of African American people. Said, "Why is this newbie getting all this?" Anyway, thank you. Just thinking, Neera Tanden, you're a tough guy, but I really like you doing the show.